Warning: the following video contains explicit language which may be offensive to some viewers or inappropriate for children. The content within this video is intended for mature audiences only.
Are you ready? Hello everybody, this is Jeff. Boy, it's a blister out here today. I think this is the hottest we've had it. The air is just dead out there, and there's no breeze, and it's humid, and it's like in the 80s, but with the humidity it feels more like it's in the 90s. It's really terrible out there. And you know, I wish I had a better air conditioner than the one I have, but you know, I guess it doesn't matter. You know, if you have more than one or a better one, I think you would still feel the effects of the humidity just the same. So, but it's sunny out, and I read a thing where Stephen King is going to expand on the pool, the swimming pool for the city of Bangor. They're going to expand on that, make it bigger, I guess, because, you know, in the summer, if you drive up towards where his house is, okay, you're going to see that pool is always full in the summer. I mean, they got everybody in there, and it doesn't seem like it's big enough, okay. I would suggest that, you know, he goes like 3 or 4 times the size that it is, because it's a popular place for kids to go in the summer, and it's just not big enough, you know. So I think, you know, he's probably going to expand on that some more later. I don't know when, but you know, it's his idea. You know, he does good for the town in Bangor. You know, he always does stuff to help, you know, people out. So, you know, he's a decent guy. I mean, yeah, I know he writes some horrific shit, you know, in his books and all that, but he ain't nothing like his stories. He's the exact opposite, I think. You know, I find that people that are artistically talented like him seem to have, you know, pretty decent level of compassion for other folks, you know. So I don't know. So the 4th of July, I hope everybody had a good 4th. Here was very weird, because they decided this year in Bangor to launch the fireworks at Bass Park. Okay, that's where they usually have the fair in Bangor. Now, because they launched the fireworks from there, they didn't tell anybody, okay, that the fireworks are going to be launched there, because I don't think they thought it through that it was going to change where people are going to look to see where the fireworks were. So they started launching them, and people were looking around, and all they could see was the very tops of the colors and all that. They couldn't really see it, because they were so pushed so far back that all the tall buildings were basically hiding the fireworks. So where people usually stand to watch the fireworks, they couldn't really see it. And so a lot of people got pissed off, and they left early. And I think that the only place you could have watched those fireworks this year was across the river into Brewer, and sat on their riverbank and watched them there. So I think that's probably where the best place would have been to watch them. But this year, you know, Bangor, it never seems like they're ever satisfied, you know, with anything. People have been complaining that the concerts they've been having over there lately are not very good. You know, it's just this local talent that shows up, and everything sounds like, you know, it's a garage band or some damn high school crap, you know, from kids. They ain't been really getting anybody. Then the Civic Center decides, you know, we're not going to do any more comic book conventions here. You know, so, you know, they basically got rid of that. And I'm like, nobody knows why, okay? And then, you know, you got, you know, this thing here with the fireworks. You know, it's like, you know, can't they just leave things alone? You know, that was working. And stop with this bullshit. Okay, they, you know, they built, like I said, they built a Civic Center. They don't want to use it apparently, because the only time they ever use it is when they have those fucking hillbilly tractor poles, which I hate. Okay, but apparently, you know, it's popular for a lot of people around here, and if they want to sit inside that building and breathe in the fumes from those friggin' trucks, go, you have at it, you know, please. But every year it's the same shit. Okay, they don't want to try anything new, and when they do, then they say, we don't like it. You know, that's what they do with the comic book conventions. You know, now now they have to go to the Bangor Mall to set up over there instead. And well, I guess it worked, because they take a lot of the empty stores and they convert them into areas for like visiting with celebrities, or you know, having people set up little shops in there for souvenirs or whatever. You know, they do that basically, and I guess it's good money for the mall, but it doesn't really last. It's just for a couple of days, and then that's it. You know, they need more than that. If they're trying to save the mall, they're going to have to do a lot more than that in there. So anyway, to get to the point of things, which I wanted to talk about, as you know, as we all know, the Supreme Court is filled with insanity these days. Okay, and the things that they've done so far have really driven a stake in the heart of women, mostly. Okay, mostly women, and to be a woman today must be really frustrating. I can't imagine. I mean, just, you know, from what I hear, what they're doing frustrates me. So I can imagine my frustration times 5 must be how they feel about it, especially the young women today. And because, you know, young women, you know, they're more likely to raise old Mary hell with things like this. You know, the Supreme Court's not doing themselves any favors here by attacking the women all the time, even, you know, by conjuring up fake cases, you know, like with the woman that didn't want to make cakes for gay couples and stuff, a situation that didn't really happen. Okay, it was just a theory. There was no plaintiff, there was nobody that had, you know, anything to do with it. It was just an idea they wanted to present to the Supreme Court to get some kind of a pre-status approval or disapproval of, that way she can feel comfortable being a racist when she went back home. Okay, never in the history of the Supreme Court have they ever had a case like that where there is no plaintiff. Okay, they just go and do this, and that's allowed. I mean, any sane court would have laughed that out of the room. Okay, because they wouldn't have even heard it. But no, because they're Republicans, and this is a special Republican issue, these justices are going to allow all kinds of weird things to go on in their court just so they can give a ruling on it. And like I said, you don't hear much from the Democrat justices, and that's sad, because, you know, they're right there. They're at ground zero here when this shit happens. And they're not really differentiating themselves much from the other 6 justices. Okay, I think that's a problem. I think that, you know, they need to speak out more about it. They need to make it known generally to everybody that, hey, we are not part of these idiots over here. The rogue gallery over there is their fucking thing. We're just here because they need 3 more fucking heads to sit at the bench. Okay, but we don't approve of anything that they do, and our votes show it. And you know, just remember that, because, you know, these people are operating you know, as a really illegitimate sort of a Supreme Court. If they had been questioned, okay, about how they stood on, you know, abortion rights, well, they were, because I remember Susan Collins come out and said that the justices lied under oath about their position about Roe versus Wade. They all said they support it, basically. Okay, not exact quote, but essentially they all said that it's the law. Okay, in other words, they're not going to mess with it. That was one of the first fucking things they did when they got in there, right? They hurried up and got to that fucking Roe v. Wade and they overturned it. That was a fucking lie. They perjured themselves under oath, and why aren't they caught, you know, being tried for that? You know, if people today, everybody today has to raise their fucking right hand and put the other one on the Bible and swear that they ain't gonna lie, they had to do the same thing. So if we get punished for that, for lying under oath, then why don't they get punished for that? For lying? What good is the fucking law if you're not gonna use it when it's needed? Okay, it would, that rule right there probably could have saved this country some shit that we're having to deal with them today, if we would have stood up for the law, you know. And, you know, their fucking way of thinking is so archaic. It really is. I mean, I don't understand how these people live in this world if they can't stand all the modern realities that we got to live with, okay? And that their black and white suggestion about things is the answer when we know it's not. And when they try to enact it, they only see that the problem gets worse. I don't see how the hell these people can stand their own fucking skin. You know, they really are not that enlightened of people. And to think that we give these folks positions in government, that's dangerous. I mean, you don't want to put people like that with a mental issue, okay, that can't think forwardly into a seat of power as a justice or a congressman or a senator or a president, you name it. You don't want people like that in government, even in your local governments, okay? It would be even worse on that level. I mean, look at let's see, the governor DeSantis here. I mean, look, as a governor, how he's really fucked his state all to hell, you know. And I can't see that it's going to be very easy for the next governor, if he's a Democrat, to go in there and try to undo it all, okay? I really don't see that that's going to be a possibility, okay? That state might just as well dry up and die, as far as I'm concerned, because if anyone lives there, they're going to want to escape after a while when they start getting themselves in binds that wouldn't be there if that fucking governor hadn't done certain things, okay? So, on top of, you know, like I said, them, what they're doing to women and stuff like that, and and then, you know, the issues about affirmative action that they, you know, basically kicked in the groin. They don't want that, which they did. Then that, another hot topic. I mean, it's like their goal is to attack society, not to attack problems in the government, okay? To them, the society is the government, okay? To them, you know, if you get rid of gays, if you get rid of women's rights, all these things, well, then everything else will just fall into place and be solved, right? Okay, that's the way they view the world. Or it's like, well, if we get rid of all these things that we don't want, okay, then the rest of the problems we face aren't really that important anymore. Really? You know, your kids not being able to go to college because they can't afford it, that's not going to be a problem later on down the road. But, you know, if it's only just straight people going to college, straight white people going to college, that's fine. Everything is hunky-dory then. But who cares about the black kids who can't go to college, okay? They don't deserve it, right? I mean, that's generally their attitude. I mean, I never thought I'd see a day where these bigots and racists and all that would actually have a foothold in our government and able to do all of these things to turn evolution of our country around, okay? And they're not done, because next year there's going to be another case, a controversial case, that they're going to discuss and possibly make a ruling that's going to change what people consider to be, you know, a real injustice for future problems. And that issue is going to be about guns, okay? But that's, guns is always going to be the thing. But not just about guns, but wife beaters, okay, who get arrested, okay? They don't want wife beaters to lose their right to have a gun. And next year they're going to hear a case about domestic abusers, and they're going to hold to a 1700s tradition of people still having their weapons, even though they are been caught beating on women and stuff like that. So let me read this article to you. This is really a fucked up eye popper here, okay? This is from The Independent, and let's see. Okay, it's entitled, "Should Domestic Abusers Have the Right to Be Armed? The Supreme Court Could Upend Protections for Survivors." A Texas man, repeatedly violated a restraining order that forbids him from possessing a firearm under federal law. Justices will decide if judges went too far after they said it was unconstitutional. Alex Woodward made this article here. In 2019, Zachy Ramey allegedly assaulted his ex-girlfriend in a Texas parking lot and then threatened to shoot her. She escaped and applied for a restraining order, and Ramey was placed under a protective order that prevented him from possessing firearms. But later that year, within a matter of weeks, and in flagrant violation of the order against him, he was involved in 5 other shootings in the state. He was charged with violating federal law that prohibits people subject to domestic violence protection orders from possessing them, pleaded guilty, and was sentenced to 6 years in prison. The Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals upheld the decision, rejecting his argument that the law infringed on his Second Amendment rights. Then, after the Supreme Court issued a landmark ruling in a Second Amendment case last year, the appeals court reversed its decision, vacated his conviction, and opened a pathway for another major Supreme Court case that could radically reshape the nation's gun laws during a growing crisis for gun violence. On the last day of its latest term, the Supreme Court announced plans to hear arguments in a case that asks whether the government can prohibit domestic violence offenders from owning firearms, setting up another major Second Amendment test before the nation's highest court. Oral arguments in United States versus Ramey will begin later this year. It will be one of only a handful of Second Amendment cases before the 9-member panel in recent years, after the court's conservative supermajority ruling last year struck down a New York law that placed limits on gun owners' abilities to carry their firearms outside of their home. If the Supreme Court upholds the lower court's decision, it will upend decades of protections for domestic violence survivors and open the door for people convicted of abusing their partners or their children to have a protected Second Amendment right to own a gun, even if a court finds that they are a credible threat. Quote, "The Fifth Circuit's extreme and reckless decision is a death sentence for women and families," unquote, according to Janet Carter, Senior Director of Issues and Appeals at gun reform advocacy group Everytown Law. Quote, "The Supreme Court must reverse this dangerous ruling. Domestic abusers do not have and should not have the constitutional right to possess a firearm," unquote. Last June, the Supreme Court's conservative majority ruled 6-3 to overturn New York state law that only allowed residents who could prove a quote-unquote special need to possess concealed carry license to receive them. The decision in New York State Rifle Pistol Association Incorporated versus Bruin, authored by Justice Clarence Thomas, also established a new test for gun laws against the Second Amendment, ruling that such restrictions should be, quote, consistent with the nation's historical tradition of firearm regulations, unquote. Justice Stephen Breyer, who retired at the end of that year's chaotic term, warned in his dissent that broadly throwing restrictions against gun ownership into doubt would jeopardize protections for domestic violence survivors. He emphasized the prevalence of guns in both domestic disputes, noting one study that found that a woman is 5 times more likely to be killed by an abusive partner if that partner has access to a gun, and that the consequences of gun violence are borne disproportionately by communities of color and black communities. Quote, many states have tried to address some of these dangers of gun violence just described by passing laws that limit, in various ways, who may purchase, carry, or use firearms of different kinds, unquote, he wrote. Quote, the court today severely burdened states' efforts to do so, unquote. He argued that it is both constitutionally proper and necessary for courts to consider the, quote, serious dangers and consequences of gun violence, unquote, that compels states to regulate firearms. Federal restrictions on gun ownership for domestic violence offenders have been in place for nearly 30 years. Nearly half of U.S. states extend similar protections for dating partners, and 12 states include similar protections under temporary restraining orders. Every year, more than 600 American women are fatally shot by intimate partners, a rate of roughly 1 every 14 hours, according to FBI reporting. Firearms are used to commit more than half of all intimate partner homicides in the U.S. Federal law prohibits anyone convicted of a, quote, misdemeanor crime of domestic violence, unquote, or who is subject to protection orders resulting from a domestic violence incident from possessing a firearm. Ramey was subject to a domestic violence order in February of 2020. Between December of 2020 and January of 2021, he was allegedly involved with 5 more shootings. First, after someone who bought drugs from him, quote, started talking trash, unquote, on social media, he fired into that person's home with an AR-15 rifle, according to prosecutors. The very next day, after colliding with another car, he allegedly shot at the driver, fled, and came back to the scene to fire more shots. 3 days later, he fired several rounds into the air. A few weeks after that, in an apparent road rage incident, he slammed his brakes on a highway, followed a truck off an exit, then fired several shots at another car traveling behind it. Days later, after a friend's credit card was declined at a fast food restaurant, he pulled out a gun and fired several shots in the air. Ramey was indicted by a federal grand jury finding that he violated a federal ban on the possession of a firearm by anyone who was subject of a domestic violence restraining order. He pled guilty. But in February, less than a year after the Bruen ruling, 3 Republican-appointed judges on a federal appeals court unanimously took the side of the domestic violence offender, whose attorneys argued that the new standard from the Supreme Court would effectively strike down federal law that prohibits people like him from owning a gun. Ramey, while hardly a model citizen, is nonetheless part of the political community entitled to the Second Amendment's guarantees, all other things equal. Donald Trump appointed Judge Corey T. Wilson had wrote, the test in Justice Thomas's opinion in the Bruen case suggested that any restrictions on gun ownership should pass a historical analog. The appeals court argued that there was no such thing in federal law that blocks domestic violence offenders from owning firearms. Our ancestors would never have accepted such a policy, according to Judge Wilson. The decision was widely derided by law enforcement agencies, civil rights group, and gun reform advocates, warning that the loss of such basic protections imperil families across the country. A group of 25 state attorneys general and a separate coalition of public health experts filed briefs in support of the government's appeal to the Supreme Court, urging that the justices swiftly reject the lower court ruling. Quote, it is common sense that people who are under active restraining orders for domestic violence should not be able to get a gun, unquote, said New York Attorney General Letitia James in a statement at the time. Quote, this is a basic protection that states and the federal government have long imposed, and the efforts to undo this law will have grave consequences for survivors of domestic abuse, law enforcement, and the general public, unquote, she added. Quote, states must have the ability to protect our communities from gun violence and prevent dangerous people from getting guns, unquote. Typically, the Supreme Court will not immediately hear a case within a year after a related ruling, so that the issue can work its way through lower courts before reaching the 9 justices. But U.S. Solicitor General Elizabeth Prelogar told the court that the appeals court decision, quote, threatens grave harms for victims of domestic violence, unquote. Lawyers for Ramey have asked the justices to uphold the lower court ruling. Quote, Bruin is less than a year old, unquote, J. Matthew Wright wrote in court filings. Lower courts are, quote, just beginning to grapple with the impacts of that case, he added. So, you know, it seems like they, you know, like I said, this is something they're probably going to deal with next summer, okay? Probably right around the same time as the 4th of July. Last summer it was Roe versus Wade. This summer it's affirmative action and the other part, I can't remember now right off the head. And next year it's going to be guns. So they have a friggin' mission to disrupt this country every 4th of July. Basically, I mean, they're trying to send a message that we don't care about this country. We're stepping all over this 4th of July because we never should have got independence from England. You know, maybe that's what it is. And the laws we had back then were perfect compared to the laws we got to live with today. Really. 1776, my friends. Any one of you want to take a guess at what kind of life existed in this country in 1776 and how the hell we treated each other back then? You want to tell me that that was a better time than now? I mean, sure, we got violence all over the damn place. And, you know, if I wasn't such a conspiracy minded person, you know, or, you know, like some of these people in like QAnon, I would say that Republicans are deliberately making this country into a madhouse just so they can come out and say, we need to go back to the beginning and reenact old laws. You know, whatever was old is new again. That'll bring everything, the violence and all that down, okay? You know, maybe that was a plan all along, is to just convince everybody that the country is totally broken from the society all the way up to the head of the government. And that the only way to save this country is to reel it all the way back into 1776, you know? Let's go to commercial break, we'll be right back.
This is me.
This is me.
This is me!
This is me.
I'm Alex Curtis. I'm a lobsterman in Maine, and this is me.
I'm Ruth McLaughlin, and this is me.
I'm Eric Hopkins. I'm an artist, and this is me.
This is me.
Me.
This is me.
This is me.
This is me.
At the end of the journey, the main thing is you, original.
Some people have a deep, abiding respect for the natural beauty that was once this country. And some people don't. People start pollution. People can stop it. Write for Pollution Booklet, Box 1771, Radio City Station, New York.
Be a part of the entertainment value of a lifetime.
I loved it. It was the best performance I've seen in a lifetime.
I loved the show. I liked it very much. He's a very entertaining man. It's well worth the money.
Now appearing in Charlottetown, coming to Halifax November 6th to the 18th, and St. John November 20th through the 26th.
I don't care, man. Dude, you are the worst human being known to mankind. I want you to know that what you have done to this state, to the United States, to everything else in this world. I don't care that your daughter's here. What you've done to people's families, what you have done to everybody else in this world. Son. Don't call me son. One. Please stand.
Okay, welcome back. So, as you saw in the video here, Richard Sherman, him trying to break into the house, he wasn't carrying a gun, thankfully. You know, if he had, I suppose he might have used it. And there would be dead people. And that's what the Supreme Court, you know, is trying to make possible, is for people in that state of mind being able to have a gun at hand and use it, and even if they get arrested or something like that, their Second Amendment right will still be protected, and when they get out, they can buy another gun and use it again. You know, I mean, I just feel like, you know, why even bother with the court system at all if you're just going to allow these kind of problems to escalate? You know what I'm saying? I mean, if you're going to just let criminals do their time and then come out and then give them all the equipment they need to start another crime spree, then, you know, what the hell's it? What did you do? You know, it's like a detention. What do you give them, an after-school detention? Okay, kids don't learn nothing from detentions, and neither will this. You know, it just, I feel like, you know, not we, but a faction of this country literally wants to step all the way back to 1776, where people having a right to a gun is absolute. Okay, or at least Republicans think that it was that way back in 1776, because today, the way they interpret that Second Amendment is very confusing. I mean, they're not literally reading the whole thing when they tell you about the absolute right that a citizen have. They don't add in the other part of it, which includes a regulated militia answerable to the government. Okay, they leave that part out because that's the only way that citizen can have a gun, as far as I'm concerned, in the reading of the Second Amendment, if they belong to a militia. If they are in the militia, then they have a right to the gun, but they are also answerable to government officials, okay, who are regulating that. Because they didn't have a National Guard in those days, so they had to create one from scratch, essentially, to have one. I mean, they didn't really have an army to speak of. It was all volunteer armies. I mean, they didn't have... I mean, this country was basically, you know, so primitive that it really couldn't defend itself much from any kind of invasion. So, you know, they had to conjure up, you know, get people, the citizens, active in defending their country, okay? And anybody that could walk on 2 feet and hold a gun was essentially drafted into a militia where they were required to fight for their country. And these days, you know, it's different because now we have the most powerful military in the world, and we have National Guardsmen, and there's no need for citizens to be armed because they're not going to be picked off the streets to do anything to defend the country. We already got that covered, okay? So the Second Amendment, as far as I'm concerned, is antiquated. Shouldn't even be around anymore because it has no purpose anymore. Okay, and certainly it's, in my opinion, it's the way things are today. Certainly justifies a complete rewriting of that Second Amendment, or even abolish it altogether. I mean, there's nothing wrong with having a rule and then all of a sudden times change so much that rule doesn't really make sense anymore. I mean, what if all of a sudden we didn't have cars and people were okay with that? Wouldn't road laws have to change, right, or be removed because we don't have cars to worry about anymore? You know, the speed limit laws would have to be cut. You know, traffic laws would have to be cut. I mean, why keep those things around? I mean, there's certain laws, I think, that, you know, we ought to review and decide whether or not they really apply to the here and now. Because, as we know, people back in 1776 probably never, in their imagination, assumed that one day, you know, we'd have what we got today, you know. But they had to think for their time. They had to think for the present, you know, what their immediate needs were. And so a lot of those laws that they created were really to address their period of time. And now those laws are being twisted and manipulated by, you know, wackadoodles in our government who want to try to use those things as a leverage to be able to get what they want, which is a country controlled ostensibly by radical right-wingers, you know, whatever you want to call them. And now that these people are out in the open, as they have been now since Trump was president, you know, we can't undo that now. They're out in the open and they're there to stay. And they have an agenda. And their agenda is just that. They want to turn this country literally upside down and bring us all the way back to those days where women didn't have a right to vote. Black people were 3/5 of a person, okay? Women had to stay home, they couldn't have jobs, okay? And men could beat and rape them because they were married to them. You know what I'm saying? They want to go all the way back to those days. You know, they just want to ignore 200 and something years of goddamn evolution in this country, because those laws back then would not work for people in America today, okay? None of those laws would work today because we're not those kind of people anymore, or at least we shouldn't be. But I think that, you know, the way people think today, the things that they need for their lives, in order for their lives to work well today, can't function under those kind of restrictive laws that were around in 1776. But they want to drag us back to that. And that's not just going to affect women. Men will be affected by that too. And certainly some men more than others. And I don't see how this country would ever allow this to happen. I mean, they're going to pick at this little by little. And this is like the boiling frog syndrome, okay? And you're slowly cranking up the heat. The frog won't jump out of the fucking pot of water because it doesn't feel what it needs to. It's just going to sit there and boil itself to death. But if the Supreme Court went ahead and did all these things at once, I mean, yeah, it would spark a fucking rebellion in this country. I dare say the Supreme Court justices' lives would be on the block. Okay, you know what they're doing isn't going to help themselves in the long run. Those justices are eventually going to become the focus for a lot of anger, revenge. You know, don't think Democrats, you know, aren't capable of pulling stunts like, you know, what went on January the 6th. You get them mad enough, they will. And I'll tell you, it's only a matter of time. They're going to cross one too many lines, I guess, and it's going to happen when things have really gotten to the point where it's almost too late to friggin' say anything, where people are just going to say enough is enough, okay? And, you know, one of these days, you know, something will happen. And it's going to spark, you know, a bloodbath in this country that's going to go on and on. It's going to have more than just two fronts, okay? It's going to be something that's going to bring all differences back to the battlefield again, you know, everybody. Anyone who isn't similar to somebody is going to be a target. And so, you know, once again, we're going to have to go through this whole period of, how do we call it, cleaning house. You know, that's what the mob calls it. You know, they say every so often you got to clean house, get rid of the old bosses, you know, and bring in new ones or something. Get rid of the bad blood. And I think, you know, that the way humans deal with things like that still applies even to today in the 21st century. And I say that, you know, at some point people are going to decide it's time to get rid of the bad blood in our government, in our society, and it's going to light a spark to really start a revolution here that's going to get violent, okay? Because we know the Republicans are willing to get violent, and in order to beat violence, one has to use violence, okay, to push it back. And so that's how I know it's going to be a bloodbath, okay? And you know, it's of all the things that we keep saying change the world, the Supreme Court is leading us to a point where the world is going to change in a big fucking way, okay? It's what's going to happen. Because we really can't sit and wait for these justices to die off so we can replace them with somebody else, okay? We can't wait for that. If we can't get them out of there now by some means, we're going to be looking at a situation where most of our rights are going to be gone, okay, and replaced with things that we never even had in our life at all. And we're going to be expected to live under these new rules. And for a lot of us, that isn't going to make much sense. Okay, the only people that'll embrace those rules will be the young people who never had any experience at all living in this country before that. Okay, so we're going to see, the old people will see how bad it's changed and remember. But with the Supreme Court constantly erasing progress that we made in this country over the many generations that it took for us to get here, they're actually putting blood back on their hands, okay? Because think about it, the Civil War, we fought the Civil War on for reasons that the Supreme Court is piloting its way into trying to undo, Okay, we made rules after the Civil War to deal with slavery and stuff like that. Well, you know, hey, if they're going to take us back to 1776, then slavery is back on the table again now. It's not even an issue that's gone, okay? And I would say that, you know, Black America really needs to get themselves ready for that, because that fight's coming, okay? If they're already attacking women right now in a big way, then guess who's next? Okay? Guess who's fucking next? And if they don't start getting involved now with doing something about the court, by, you know, pushing our government to find a way to get rid of these justices, all of them. If you have to get rid of the Democrat ones in there, the whole Congress, then do it. It's worth the sacrifice to get rid of the good with the bad here, because there's more bad than there is good. But we have to do something to reset the court and get that court to undo the fucking rulings that this court's been making, okay? And we need to find a way to say, look, once a ruling is made in the Supreme Court, it is set in stone. It cannot be overturned, okay? Because otherwise we're going to be constantly going back and flip-flopping all the time as we move forward into the country until all the racists are gone, until all the bigots are gone. This possibility of what we're living through right now could happen all over again. Okay, and so rulings by the Supreme Court have to be final, no matter how they come down. They have to be final. And if they don't do this, I mean, we wouldn't have to. I mean, if they'd have codified Roe versus Wade, I don't think we would have had to deal with this. Or maybe we would. I don't know. But they should have done that. They should have codified it into some law, and you know, but they didn't. They left the door wide open for the Supreme Court to come in there and do what they did. Okay, which tells me that, you know, maybe there wasn't a serious enough motivation to get people to allow women to have that right back in the day. Okay, because if they just let the Supreme Court handle it, and that, you know, and then the government decided not to do anything else further with it, then hey, you know, they dropped the ball and they're partially to blame too. But we have to do something about that. I mean, we're all talking about how we need to change the Supreme Court to fit the times. Well, there's a lot that needs to be changed about that court, because the way it's operating now is the same way it's operated forever in this country. And as like I said before, times have changed, and so should the court. And if the court doesn't evolve like when the country evolves, then the court becomes obsolete. In my opinion, it becomes ancient. We don't deal with obsolete shit in this country anymore, okay? And things that don't change with the times suddenly become pushed back on the shelf, you know, or put in a museum. And the Supreme Court, as far as I'm concerned, the way it is run today is a museum piece. And we shouldn't be relying so heavily on it for our needs, because it can't do that. I explained before how, you know, that court gets thousands of requests for cases to be heard, and they only pick and choose the ones that would put a spotlight on them in a big way. So a lot of people never get heard by the court when they have important things they got to have settled. So the court really is a showboating organization, I think, in a way, that likes to throw its fat around to decide what's constitutional and what isn't. Fact is, they don't even go by the fucking piece of paper that they're supposed to be defending. They take their own political views and throw it into the mix and try to find some way to justify it through the Constitution. Okay, even if they have to go back to the early years of this country and some justice what had said back then to defend what they're doing now. Okay, if you got to go back 100 and more years in a case to set precedent, then you've already lost. As far as I'm concerned, you've already lost, because times have changed so much in the time, you know, since the 19th century or even further back, that, you know, those cases, those rulings don't even really matter for what's going on now. Okay, you can't take a ruling out of context back then and apply it to today. It just doesn't work. But justices are being allowed to do that they can quote something from, you know, 1805 or whatever, and say they were speaking to today. Really? Those people way back then knew how today was going to be, and they were speaking to us then? You know, what are they, gods or something? No. No, people, you know, it's just, we're being misled. We're being pulled by the nose to go down into this crevice here of ancient history and trying to set up our country to the way it was back then. And I'll tell you, if you don't know your history, you're not going to really understand what those years were like. So I would suggest, if you want to know something about it, remind yourself about those things, you know, start reading some history online about the 1700s and find out. If you see things that are familiar there that are being talked about today, then you see where the Republicans are going here with this. Okay? They really have it in their head that this is the way to go with this country. All right? So, you know, I would suggest to everybody to just keep your mind open and start reading a little history, you know, as to where they're getting these silly ideas about, you know, like Roe versus Wade and, you know, the Second Amendment issue and all that other stuff, and then, you know, college education and things. You know what I'm saying? Just, it's all got a basis from way back when things were done differently, and that's where they want to go. Which is basically they want to drop every citizen out of their purview of care, if you will. They just don't want to deal with Americans anymore, the citizens. Okay, and they want government to be small, very small, too small, in fact, to deal with 350 million Americans. And I'll tell you, if they think the country's got problems now, you take us back to those years and we're going to double, triple our problems in a very short time. Okay, that's it for today, and I hope everybody has a great rest of the week. So please keep your ears open to COVID-19 updates. And please subscribe, comment. I'd love to hear from you. And treat each other nice out there during these times. It's the only respite, the only glass of cold water we could get in this extreme heat is by somebody showing a little bit of compassion during times when we feel like there isn't any compassion. We need to remind ourselves that we are capable of compassion and understanding, and that we are not what we see on television by devious people working in our government. We don't have to be like them at all. Let them be rotten if they want, but we don't have to be. So, take care, everybody. Talk to you later.